Okay, welcome to this special episode of Basic Law. This week we're speaking with Israeli academic, author, and media figure Dr. Gadi Taub. We are filming at the JNS International Policy Summit in Jerusalem, and we have a hard stop soon before our panel. But I wanted to take the time to get to know one of the most articulate explainers, I think, of the Israeli right today.
Thank you, Marlena.
And you're prolific and popular in English as well as Hebrew, which is very uncommon. I want to hear about how you think about some of the challenges.
I'm not popular enough in English for my taste.
Well, we're going to work on that.
Yeah, that's why I'm here.
Right now.
No, we have Mike Duran and I have a podcast called Israel Update, and we're getting a loyal audience gradually. So we're doing some stuff in English, but my podcast in Hebrew is now taking like half my time. It's because we are changing the media, you know.
You are, but tell me about yourself first. Just a quick minute on who you are for
minute
people.
About who I am.
Yeah.
So should I start with my parents?
If you want to. Or
yeah, because I mean, you know, I come from the left.
Yeah.
Hardcore Zionist leftists. They would have been horrified by the left of today. My mother was the daughter of pioneers, actual pioneers. They lived in tents in the Israel Valley from the 20s. Dried swamps, my grandfather did, with eucalyptus trees. And my grandmother made gravel with a hammer. She was a bit of a tough girl. And they founded one of the Shomer HaTzair kibbutzim, which they left because it was too oppressive. In the end, that's Mishmar HaEmek, a very successful kibbutz. And my father was a refugee from Bratislava in Slovakia, and a refugee, not a Holocaust survivor, because he remembers the Wehrmacht entering Czechoslovakia, Bratislava, in March of '39.
Wow.
Then his mother died, and he remembers the Wehrmacht officers knocking at their door and asking for water to cook pasta. They were cooking pasta they had courtyards in these buildings in Bratislava, and you remember giving these guys water, and he convinced his father, who was broken after losing his wife, he convinced him to go to Eretz Israel, because my father at 12 read newspapers in 4 languages. That must have been a special child. And he was very politically aware, and he said to his father, there's not going to be a place for Jews in Europe, only the land of Israel.
At the age of 12?
Yeah, at the age of 12.
Not bad.
And they spent 4 months, first in a riverboat down the Danube, and then at sea in a ship that my father referred to as a bathtub with 400 people, and no country in the world let them ashore. So I tell my students, I teach the Zionist idea, history of Zionism, and I tell them I can make all the arguments for why Zionism is justified and moral, but in the end I'm an instinctive Zionist, because my father was a 12-year-old Jewish boy with water under his feet and nowhere to go. So I don't need an explanation. And he became a palmachnik. He lost most of his left hand in the War of Independence. And so he also lost his profession, which he was a blacksmith. And so he became an economist, actually a successful one. And he was the Secretary General of the Bank of Israel, and then the head of the Securities and Exchange Commission. And when the Likud came to power, they always say that Likud was not smart enough to throw out all the civil servants from Mapai who still held the deep state.
But they threw out one, right?
They threw out my father. And my father, he could have been rich. He got off, he was the head of the Securities and Exchange Commission.
Yeah.
He said, I did not come here to make money. I came here to establish a Jewish state. And he took a lower job in the public sector. And you come from the Israeli right. So you may be impressed by the fact that he initiated, along with Professor Dan Miron, and published the full writing of Uri Tzvi Greenberg, the poet
Very
of the
impressed.
right,
yeah.
Because my father said this is a major cultural asset, and it's everyone's asset. So that was my father. Yeah, great man.
It's an incredibly inspirational thing to share right before Yom HaAtzmaut.
Yeah, absolutely.
But you still didn't tell me what you do.
What I do?
You, Gadi.
What I do? I do many things. because in Israel it's very hard to make a living from just doing one. So I'm an academic, basically. I am tenured, and I don't like to talk about my relations with the Israeli academia. I'll just say this. I was tenured before I moved to the right. And it's not easy to be a conservative in academia everywhere. If you want to publish, if you want to conferences and so forth. So, but I'm safe. I have tenure, and nobody interferes with my teaching. I'll say that. So, and I love teaching. So I do that. I write a lot. Now I can say that I spend something like a part-time job just on Twitter, Telegram, and Facebook, just arguing away, and we feel this has revolutionized media in Israel, because in the Oslo days they could just impose a narrative and we could not argue. I mean, I was happy with that narrative back then, but now we've broken their monopoly, and the rest of the time I do my Hebrew podcast, which is started as a hobby during the COVID days when we were locked up. I just got married back then, so being locked up with a newlywed locked up was just great for us. And I started this podcast, and it was a hobby, but now it's a job.
That's, I think, one of the more influential podcasts in Israeli political and social life today. So let's do I'll
just say for my podcast that the revolution that's happened in the United States is happening here, and my way of conveying that to people who don't know the scene or me is that the only time that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu laid out his full conception of the war until now was at my podcast. He doesn't do any interviews these days, but he laid out in 1 hour and 10 minutes like the whole story of the major decisions of the war.
Is that subtitled?
It's now subtitled, and it appears with subtitles on the Israel Update podcast on both Rumble and on the tablet website where I occasionally write, and also on YouTube. So if you look up Israel Update, Michael Duran, Gadi Taub, you'll find it.
I encourage people to look into it. It's a very high quality podcast. Let's try to use the limited time that we have now to try to understand where Israel is, with an emphasis on law and democracy, and where it's going. So, in the long view of Zionist history, professor or doctor in Israel, how have we come to the point where the legal system is basically a proxy for a culture war after all this time?
Yeah. There was, I think, it was a leftist who first observed this in detail. Professor Manny Mountner, who now backed off from free speech and said Simcha Rotman should not be invited to Tel Aviv University because we're in a crisis. So he's anti-reform, right? Like the radical anti-reform. But he wrote a book, I think it was in the beginning of the 2000s, and he said after the left lost power in 1977, after in 81 it realized that was not a fluke, like the first Trump administration and the second Trump administration. The first one could have been a fluke, second one is no longer a fluke. So the Israeli left has transferred its center of its political action from electoral politics, where it couldn't win, to non-elected bodies that could impose its will. And that met the incredibly ambitious judge, Aaron Barak. And so there was an alliance between a very activist court and a very desperate left, which led to the establishment of an uber government in Israel. And now, people say, I just had an argument this last week with a dear friend of mine, Professor Liav Orgad, who is a law scholar, and he described all the different stages of what we call the judicial revolution of Aaron Barak, and referred them to the democratic system. And in the end, I said, Liav, you keep saying democracy, but you guys from law schools have invaded our territory, we who teach political theory, and with all your strange concepts. And we are much less sophisticated. When we see a system of government, we ask, who makes the decisions? That is, where does sovereignty reside? And if sovereignty is the authority to make the final decision on the whole of the legal and political sphere, then in Israel, sovereignty itself now resides with 15 unelected judges. That's where it is. There is no action by the two elected branches of government, the executive and the legislature. There's no action that the court cannot reverse. So we can now no longer say, technically, that Israel is a democracy.
Just to step back for a second, when we talk about the right, the left, the 80s, I'm not sure that it's clear to people outside of Israel what the right represented, what the left represented. We simply talk about these things as if they're, there's two blocks, but Israel is much more complex than that.
Yeah.
There are competing visions on many different issues. So can you give a bit more insight into that aspect? What is the right, what is the left? What was the right, what was the left?
I think, the originally the right and the left were divided on economic lines. We had a labor government under the leadership of Mapai, and we had a very tiny faction that considered itself to be liberal. So in original Israeli terms, it was socialist versus liberal. The liberal was the right. Now we import in American terms, and I think we're witnessing another shift, because for a long time now liberal meant left for Americans, and now they have become progressive and we have become the real liberals. Like the conservatives are the real liberals, and so
people who seek to preserve liberty.
Yeah, and so they center on Edmund Burke, or Ronald Reagan, and then in back of him Edmund Burke, because this was the combination of the reverence of tradition with the reverence of personal liberty. But in Israel, this was all distorted, and left and right meant hawk or dove. And this is what defines them today, and this is what's behind the controversy over judicial reform, on which the left was willing to burn the house down. And there's reason for it. The left waged all its bets on Oslo and on the idea of a two-state solution. The two-state solution collapsed. The left is convincing itself that it's still possible. In order for that to be true, they need to think that the right in Israel is what sabotaged the Oslo Agreement, that we do have a partner, but they can't convince the Israeli public of that fact. And so they hope to impose their vision through A, the courts, B, a hostile American administration. This is why they all rooted for Kamala Harris, who is who belongs emotionally and ideologically, if there is an ideology, to the squad. So they put all their chips on American anti-Semitism to solve Israel's problems. This is mind-boggling. These people supported a woman that was clearly hostile to Israel, who said she understands the Hamas, the pro-Hamas demonstrations in universities. And when you try to remind them, do you know what Kamala Harris did after October 7th? When a wave of anti-Semitism swept the United States, what she did was establish an institution to combat Islamophobia, a task force to combat Islamophobia. That was her concern as vice president back then. So this is why hawks and doves are now divided along the same line over judicial reform. Because if you limit the power of the court and bring it back to electoral politics, the left will lose. And so here we are. And this is connected also to their view of the war.
Their view of the war, but also, I would assume a self-identity, or the relationship to religion, the relationship to different ethnic lines.
Yeah. All of these
things boil down into the hawk-dove distinction?
Yeah, because if you look a little deeper, then the left had a vision of normality, which stemmed from original Zionism. Zionism is about normalizing Jewish existence. Where we did not have agency, now we will, like all nations. It is the right of the Jewish, it is the natural right of the Jewish people to be like all peoples, masters of their own fate in their own sovereign state. That's the Declaration of Independence. And so the idea that we should be normal is rooted in Zionism. But then after the 73 war and the peace with Egypt, normal became no more war. The influence of the 60s and many things. So normal is let's get out of this Masada siege mentality. And the problem is us. Let us be normal. This is what my friend Irit Linu calls, they wanted Israel to be Sweden in Hebrew. Just a normal European state without the burden of Jewish history. And so it became, their Zionism became from the negation of diaspora to the negation of Judaism. And you could see that on Yom Kippur, before the disaster of October 7, where they were passionately fighting against the right of secular Jews to pray in the public sphere in Tel Aviv.
Secular Jews were fighting against the voluntary...
Secular Jews like me were fighting for the right to pray in public, because there were the beautiful public prayers in places like Dizengoff Center, which a religious community organizes, national religious, but secular people come to, because this is our tradition, and because on Yom Kippur you come there. I confess I didn't, but now I was one of the organizers this year. I helped organize the prayers because I saw this. Think about it. This is nuts. They want the Jewish state to forbid public Jewish prayers on Yom Kippur. If Germany would have done that, we would petition the Chancellor and the UN and the Security Council. We would scream anti-Semitism. But for them, this is a threat, because they crawled out of the muddy hole with this ancient Jewish identity, which doesn't smell good anymore. It's like a swamp, the dark swamp that they have emerged to the lit world of the progressives, and now they are globalist progressives, and we, that is you and I, are, along with the religious, are pulling them back, like Al Pacino in The Godfather. I went out and they pulled me right back in. That's their mentality.
Okay, so let's try to bring it, or a few days before Yom Ha'atzmaut right now, let's try to bring it to a place of construction, somewhere positive. Okay, so it's been a very rough few months with everything that relates to the elected rung and the judiciary, the bureaucracy. The stay of the firing of the Shabak director has even brought diplomatic criticism, international diplomatic criticism. We have, of course, the issue of incapacitation that's currently re-emerging. There have been a lot of troubling stories about the prosecution, the Shabak, and procedural violations with suspects and so on.
Jewish suspects.
Yes. So we're facing major constitutional crises on these issues and on others, but we want a strong, safe, secure, flourishing Israel. What needs to be done to right the ship now?
Right now, or I'd say in the grand scheme of things.
Short-term and grand scheme. Go for it.
So in the long run, of course, we need to get rid of the silly invention of the Attorney General in Israel, which is both the Attorney General, head of the prosecution, and also the legal counsel to the executive. But in Israel, her advice to the executive makes it obligatory. So technically, maybe she is a sovereign in Israel. And even on the left, people like Shlomo Avineri said, there's no such thing anywhere. There's no job in the democratic world with so much authority. And then they thought, maybe Louis XVI, the 14th. He also had a council advising him. So more than Louis XVI. So this is a ridiculous thing. But I think if you want something constructive rather than just what I want to destroy, other than make the court balance and a lot of other things and limit the power of the court, is first of all, let's strengthen our Knesset. The spectacle where the chief of police and the state attorney, Shai Nitzan it was back then, just snub them. The Vadat Apnim, the Committee on the Interior, invite the state attorney to talk about prosecution, the
Right.
length of trials, many other things, and he just doesn't show up. And then when he does, he lies, and there's no sanction against him. And then, Kineret Barashi, my friend, keeps quoting him. I don't know if how true, but she repeats it, so I'll repeat it too. They had some argument in court on two sides, and then on the side he said to her, "Who do you think they're going to believe, you or me?" That's because they're one clique, all these people, the judges, the attorney, the prosecutors, and the Supreme Court. And so the first thing we should do is give the Knesset the authorities that Congress has. If a committee of Congress subpoenas you, you have to come. And if you lie under oath, you're liable to criminal prosecution. That's one thing we need to...
Doesn't the Knesset have to give that to itself? I mean, where does that power currently reside?
Yeah, the Knesset has to give it to itself, but of course, if it will, that would be struck down by the Supreme Court.
So then how do you do that? How would you...
So there are two schools here in how can we break the cycle, because there's a reform, but the court struck down the reform that was supposed to reform it.
Right.
So it was in clear violation and a conflict of interest. So one way to do it is confrontation. Go all in and say, we are now the Knesset. We are having something like a constitutional convention. Go to the elections on this platform and say, we are going to overhaul the whole system, and let's see what you do. And the other is I'll call it the shrugging, strategy. Let them say something radical that they will, and just ignore it. And Hannah Arendt said that the thing that undermines authority more than anything else is laughter. So if they will make a ridiculous charge, there's an opportunity now. I don't know if Netanyahu wants to go that way, but imagine the cabinet has the authority to dismiss the head of Shin Bet. Now the Supreme Court is debating whether the dismissal is legal or not. The cabinet cannot say, okay, you forced us to take him back, we'll ignore him. Okay, you forced us to take him back, we'll ignore him. And then there is a moment, and I see that judges already wavering, where it will be the old man behind the curtain in the Wizard of Oz moment, in which they would scream, but we have the authority, and we will shrug. And it's bound to happen sometime. I don't know if in the midst of a war is a good idea.
Right.
I don't know if before the hoped for attack on Iran it's a good idea. But in the end, it will have to be done, because they are so isolated from the consequences of their own decisions that they don't understand that they're walking on a limb. And I'm much more optimistic than most of my friends on the right, who've been battered for so many years. But I come from the left, and we are very arrogant. We feel we feel we are the proprietors. And so these invaders from the Supreme Court, the newly conservatives like myself, and you, the traditional carriers of this torch of freedom, that's the one thing we can help you with. Learn from our arrogance, because in the end, we see this guy who put the crown in his own head, and I'm telling you that they are bleeding confidence in their institutions, and in the end, they will be risible, and that it will collapse of its own accord.
I want to learn one more thing from you before we close. All right. So I have one drum that I continue to beat as regards my friends on the right, which is that I think that we talk too often now in terms of structural reforms and power, and less in terms of national identity and individual rights. And that part of that constructive aspect that I'd like people to provide on the right is to explain what we're fighting for and not just what we're fighting against. Do you think that critique holds water? And regardless, how would you frame it in the most positive terminology, what you're fighting for.
I'm elated by that critique because from the other side, I'm pulling our wagon and you're pushing it, and we're doing the same thing because what you're saying is stop acting like the opposition, stop screaming no that, start building your own things, and that's the kind of confidence that the right does not have, even when it's in power. The right in Israel is looking out the corner of his eye to get a nod from the proprietors, from the establishment. But this establishment is collapsing. Look at their hysteria. And Elana, I know them personally. I smell their sweat. I'm telling you, they are in a tantrum because they are hysterical and they feel they've lost it. They've lost it demographically, and also they've lost it. It's all these smart manipulators of public opinion, these strategies and advertising, copywriters and all that. You can see them calculating. Let's take the hostage issue and let's hurl that at the government, and then the government will lose the war, and then Netanyahu will collapse. What they did, there's going to be a very high price for, and people are waking up as we speak now. The bereaved families are organizing against the Mate, the committee of the families for returning the hostages, who have manipulated the hostage issue into an anti-Bibi movement at the expense of the hostages. I said this in the beginning of the war, but people were so shocked. I said, look, they're putting the hostages, the families of the hostages, in the direct collision course with the basic interest of the state of Israel, which is to win this war. They're going to try to stop the war, and they're sending these families on the railroad track to be run down by a train now. And this is unforgivable. And at one point, this will explode. And it's very close. It's very close. Their lies, their constant lies are, it's like, in the United States, the media, we thought, we looked at this and we said, you've taken down Trump. With 3 years of Russian collusion a hoax, your echo chamber is so airtight that you've managed to take a president down. You can do anything. And this, just in one day, in 50 minutes, the bubble exploded and nothing was left of it. They lied about Biden for 3 years, and suddenly we saw Biden with Trump, and the whole thing collapsed, and the media is not recuperating. People are, nobody's going to CNN. People are going to Joe Rogan. It's over. Or my podcast.
Well, your podcast. I think people should definitely go to your podcast. We have to break because our panel on Israeli democracy is upcoming. So I'll just conclude by saying that this is a place of miracles. I have great hopes for it. I love Israel. I love the Israeli people. I pray for the safety of our troops and of our hostages.
Elana, you are great. We need more of you.
So, let's go.
Thanks.